Welcome aboard and welcome to another edition of the Scott Hamilton Show. And we've got a lot to talk about today, even though it's supposed to be one of those Monday, middle of the week areas on the college football schedule. We still have some interesting things to talk about. We've got David Cobb of CBS Sports. He's going to join us later, going to chop up a few things regarding Southern Cal, regarding the Georgia Bulldogs, and also kind of whip around the Pac-12. Again, we've discussed about it here, the Pac-12 in the middle of just a phenomenal season, and it's kind of a shame considering it's going to be the last season of the Pac-12. We're going to discuss that and some other issues with David Cobb of CBS Sports. But let's get to the headlines and the disclaimer I always give, the Scott Hamilton Show, the most tech-savvy of all shows. We got the whiteboard, grease board, whatever you want to call it. Looking ahead already to week 6, and I can't help it because why? Bama at A&M. Bama right now 2.5-point favorite at Texas A&M. Jimbo versus Saban. Saban versus Jimbo. Remember, Jimbo won this game 2 years ago. Upset in College Station. Became the first Nick Saban assistant to beat Nick Saban. So that was a big deal there. We had the whole back and forth at the spring meetings last year. We're leading up to the spring meetings, rather. Has it quieted, really? Maybe not, kind of. Either way, there's a little bit of between those two teams, so I'm looking forward to that game being played on Saturday. Again, Crimson Tide, 2.5-point favorite. The other one, the Red River rivalry. Texas and Oklahoma played in the fairgrounds. Man, this is going to be a fantastic football game. Right now, Texas is 6.5-point favorite, and according to our friend Brett McMurphy at the Action Network, only the 5th time since 2005 that Texas is a favorite in this game. They've won the past 4 when they have been the favorite. And remember, it was this game also 2 years ago that gave us the real arrival of Caleb Williams. He went into the game second half playing for Oklahoma against Texas. Spencer Rattler pulled out. I don't think he ever saw the field again at Oklahoma. He's ended up transferring to South Carolina. Caleb Williams goes and does what he does for the rest of the season for the Sooners. After that, he goes to Southern Cal right behind Lincoln Riley, goes on to win the Heisman Trophy last year, and having an absolutely marvelous season this year. His numbers actually better than last year when he won the Heisman Trophy. So this game's always it's got a little intrigue to it, a little something extra. Looking forward to that one as well. And there are a few others that we'll talk about as the week goes on. Let's get some news. Duke quarterback Riley Leonard, what a just phenomenal athlete, football player. That's the best way to put it. Suffered an injury against Notre Dame on the final drive of the game, of Duke's final drive of the game. Didn't look great, looked terrible. Not season ending, but he is going to miss a few weeks. They're defining it as the proverbial high ankle sprain. So he is going to be out of commission for quite a while. And one of the good things to come out of that, however, was that image of Sam Hartman, Notre Dame quarterback, former Wake Forest quarterback, waiting in full uniform outside the pop-up medical tent behind the Duke bench while fans are leaving, teams are leaving, people are packing up, getting cords and all this, and Sam Hartman waiting to check on Riley Leonard, his counterpart for the Duke Blue Devils. Riley comes out on crutches. They give each other a little bro hug and go on about their way. The whole interaction lasted maybe 7 to 10 seconds. Maybe I'm off a little bit. And then they went about their way. But Sam Hartman, he wanted to make that gesture. So good on Sam Hartman. NC State changing quarterbacks. And this one is kind of shocking to me. Because I was a Brennan Armstrong guy. Brennan Armstrong transferring into NC State to play quarterback for the Wolfpack after a decent time with Virginia. Remember, 2 years ago, Brennan Armstrong was arguably the best quarterback in the ACC. Best quarterback in the ACC up to that point. Hasn't worked out. He took a step back last year, and again, I want to make sure that I'm getting everything correctly here. Took a step back last year 1 under Tony Elliott. Transferred to NC State after Devin Leary surprisingly transferred and is now the quarterback of Kentucky. And we might or might not be talking about Kentucky with David Cobb later in the program. Just hasn't worked out for him. Yeah, NC State coach Dave Dorn announcing that MJ Morris will place Brennan Armstrong, trying to spark a struggling offense. Remember, NC State coming off that Friday night loss Home loss. Home loss, I want to say. Let me confirm that as well. I'm all over the place today. To Louisville. Undefeated Louisville. Who would have thought that? Dave Dorn trying to shake things up for the Wolfpack. And Dave Dorn, one of the most underwhelming coaches in the ACC. He's been there for a long time. He's been there for about a decade now. Nothing great ever happens, but the bottom never does completely fall out. Yeah, that was a home loss, 13-10 to Louisville. And in that game, Brennan Armstrong, and I want to make sure I quote these correctly, 13-25, 112 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 INTs. This year just not playing out well for him whatsoever. I'm looking at his numbers. This is a guy in 2021, completed 65% of his passes, almost 4,500 yards, 31 touchdowns, only 10 picks. That's getting it done. Regresses last year, 2,200 yards, 7 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. And then this year, 5 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, only 971 yards. So it's just a shocking turn of events for Brennan Armstrong, quarterback at NC State. Also, another quarterback, Iowa State's Caden McNown, out for the year, ACL tear. What does that mean for the Hawkeyes? What does that mean for the drive for 325? Remember, they've got to score a specific number of points this year in order for Brian Ferentz, the offensive coordinator, to keep his job. Not looking good for Iowa, bringing in a replacement quarterback. We're going to pull it up now and make sure, because they were shut out against Penn State, scored some points over the weekend, but still off the average that is stipulated in Brian Ferentz's new contract. So we'll have to monitor that going forward. Here's the thing, though, and I might be speaking out of turn, and if somebody out there can fact check me on this, I want to say the contract doesn't actually call for him to be fired, but they would have to renegotiate another contract. I want to say that is actually the case. If so, this is much ado about nothing, nepotism at its finest. By the way, Iowa actually 4-1. They're 4-1. They beat Michigan State 26-16, shut out against Penn State, but Western Michigan, they scored 41 points. So right now you look at the stats, and they are averaging 22.2 points a game. They got to be averaging 25. So we'll monitor that. A couple other bits of news. One that's actually news. The NCAA considering shrinking the portal period. Right now, the transfer portal is open for a total of 60 days during the year. They're looking at condensing that to perhaps 35 to 40 days, and that is significant. But even though research shows that a large number of the athletes that enter the transfer portal, they find a home 5 days after doing so. But they're wanting to get those windows a little tighter to help out coaches who have roster management issues. Hey, the portal's still open. We got to be careful. Will we lose a player? Do we need to get a player? It'll make things a little cleaner with regards to that. So I'm cool with that. Portal is the portal. It's here to stay. I'm not going to bitch and moan about it. Here's an interesting note, and I'm going to put this out there before we take a break. And it's something that's becoming almost like a Groundhog Day-like phenomenon. It really is. And I'm going to pull it up again because I like to make sure I get things correctly. Everybody knows Colorado is the biggest story in college football, perhaps the biggest story in sports this year. Well, once again, Colorado, for the fourth time in 5 weeks, the most watched college football game. 7.2 million viewers for its game against Southern Cal, which had an absolutely wild second half in which Colorado came roaring back to narrowly lose to Southern Cal. The only game that Colorado hasn't played this year, Colorado-Nebraska, it wasn't the most watched that week. Bama-Texas actually was the most watched of the week. So Deion just getting all this loads of attention, continues to do so at Colorado, even though we knew we expected it to be a blowout, and it was shaping up to be a blowout, and then it ended up being a very close game. I don't know how much of that, though, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, because when you think about Deion Sanders, you're in one camp or the other. You're going to hate him or you love him. I really am kind of in the middle. I probably love him more than I hate him, because I do think he is a really positive influence on his players. The way he redid his roster, I don't think is cool, but he don't hate the player, hate the game. Those are the rules, and that's what he did. He used the rules to his advantage. But what he's done is absolutely incredible to highlight that program And I'm wondering, though, this comeback against Colorado, how much of it was Southern Cal taking its foot off the gas a little bit too soon? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate too hard. They've got Arizona State this weekend, only available on Pac-12. It ain't going to be the most watched in the country. I can tell you that much right now. I'll be lucky to find it streaming somewhere on some pirate channel out of, I don't know, Thailand or somewhere. Colorado 4-point favorite right now against Arizona State. They get that. That's their fourth win. Got to have 6 to get in a bowl game. I think their odds of making a bowl game are really, really strong right now. A lot of other things to talk about, but we got David Cobb, CBS Sports. He's on the other side. I'm going to make sure I use my fancy graphics again. David Cobb, CBS Sports on the other side. We're going to chop up Georgia, going to chop up Southern Cal, hit a few other odds and ends. Stick around. More of the Scott Hamilton Show to come.
Hello, sports fans. FanStream Sports.
Hey, you like golf? There's a good chance you do, because I said so. But what do you need playing golf? Well, you need clubs. Right? Clubs, you need balls. The thing that people don't usually think about is that golf bag. And that's what most people see when they look at your golf clubs. Like right off the bat. And if you've got a raggedy bag, it's not doing you any favors, bud. So get you a new bag. Go over to orca-golf.com. Orca-golf.com. Why are you going there? You're going there because you want a golf bag, but you want one that's kind of screams you. So you want to pick the colors.
Papers for
well,
the
you can use your own
30,
custom
60,
colors.
90.
Maybe you have a logo in mind. Maybe it's your
the merger.
logo. You're like Prince. You just have a symbol. That's the case. Dude, you can get your logo on there. Your name, just get it done exactly like what you want it done by actual designers. Nothing goes out of their factory without the approval of the founder, Erica Bennett, who is just brilliant. We've seen some of her bags. We've got one of them actually in the studio. And you know what? Dude, it looks good. If you want other people to look at your golf setup and go, man, that just screams Frank. You want that? Then go over to orca-golf.com. Do yourself a favor and use the promo code DSP10 for 10% off and free shipping. I'll say that again, DSP10 for 10% off and free shipping. So do it today, because Orca Golf is the best choice in the game.
Hi, golfers. IndyCar Tim here. I want to talk to you a little bit about Golf Central Magazine. It's not just a golf magazine. It's the magazine for everything: turf, travel, philanthropy, and lifestyle. Head over to golfcentralmag.com and check out the latest issue. Some of the regular features in Golf Central Magazine: the Golf Bachelorette of the Month, the Golf Bachelor of the Month, the Golf Cart Girl of the Month, Golf History, Grip It and Sip It. So head over to golfcentralmag.com. It's free. It's the magazine for everything: turf, travel, philanthropy, and lifestyle. Golf Central Magazine at golfcentralmag.com. We'll see you there.
All right, guys, time to talk a little bit about Turf Life. You've seen the hats on our heads. You've been or seen the video of the studio. You've seen that the decals are all over the place. Turf Life. Man, it's the brand that salutes the consumer and industry players everywhere whose lives involve turf. What does that mean? That means if you play or have a business or, maybe you're a sports educator, you're going to be on turf at some point. So you live the turf life. So go ahead and tell everybody you live the turf life by having your Turf Life window decal or, the hat or the keychain or the something. Along that lines, just go to turflifeclub.com and become a turf head. That's what it's called when you live the turf life. You're now a turf head. And you can go join the club today and snag that window decal or snag any other special Turf Life accessories and go over there to that website, which is turflifeclub.com, and get your stuff and show everybody that, man, I'm all about that turf life. And then you just kind of raise your coffee mug at them and go, yeah, turf life, baby. That's what it's about. And then that's the end of the commercial. Ding. That means it's done in microwave talk.
Hey, listeners, make sure you check out the brand new FanStream Sports in-studio text line. You can reach us during any of our live shows or 24/7 at 214-937-0569. That's 214-937-0569. Text us 24/7, day or night, and we'll reply to you and make you part of the show.
Coming back at you. Now, more FanStream
We're at the part of the week where we're still looking back at week 5, but we're going to take a look at week 6. But there's so much to put into proper context that's already happened before we can really take a look at week 6. So we're going to do that now. We're going to hit some of the storylines coming out of week 5 that are really important and that'll help us shape things going forward. And joining me now, he covers college sports for CBS Sports. It's our friend David Cobb. David, welcome aboard. Glad to have you on. And first question right out of the gate, who should be more concerned right now about making the college football playoff? Should it be Southern Cal or should it be Georgia?
Southern Cal, because that Pac-12 is rough this year. It is we're getting into October now. Conference play is heating up, and some of these Pac-12 teams, they're going to start picking each other off. We got Washington's going to play Oregon, and USC's schedule strength is about to increase dramatically. There's about 7 teams in the upper crust of that conference who are all capable of beating each other on a given day. And we saw that this past week with Oregon State taking out Utah in the Friday night matchup. There's a lot of landmines ahead for USC, especially with a defense that clearly has some flaws. So Georgia's not perfect either, but their schedule is easier. They play in the SEC East. They're not really going to be challenged. They haven't looked great, but even if they pick up a loss somewhere along the way, they're still going to cakewalk into the SEC title game in all likelihood. And so long as they win there, they're fine for the playoff. Whereas USC, there's still a scenario in which the Trojans lose 3 games. I'm not predicting that, but the schedule is such that it's certainly possible.
We'll touch on Georgia in a moment. I have some thoughts there and a nice little anecdote. But when it comes to Southern Cal and we think about Lincoln Riley, this is a habitual thing. It's a perpetual thing, an offense that overwhelms everybody, but a defense that is far from overwhelming, very underwhelming. What is it about that mindset that Lincoln Riley can't overcome? Because he knows it's a problem. He knows it's an issue. They've got to address it. Does Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator, have naked pictures of him or something? I can't wrap my mind around it, Dave. What's your take?
Well, he has been too loyal to Alex Grinch. I think that's clear. The Oklahoma fans will tell you that, because as successful as Lincoln Riley was there at getting the Sooners to the college football playoff, the thing that held them back from ultimately breaking through was the defense. And these USC teams, through a year and a half now out there for Lincoln Riley, are very similar. And I think maybe we make too much of the second half of that game against Colorado due to the fact that the offense retracted into a shell of itself with such a large lead. And the defense, they might have been playing a little softer, playing a little bit more prevent, maybe getting some other guys a few reps out there and not putting their best foot forward. But the fact remains, even without some of those factors, this USC defense still clearly has some flaws to address. And all offseason, we heard about how some of these transfers were going to make the difference. And Bear Alexander was coming in from Georgia, and they were going to make that front a whole lot tougher. And that just has not come to manifest yet. And you have to look at the coaching when there's such a long trend of this issue. And so it's not going to be now, obviously. I certainly wouldn't expect for it to be now. But at some point, Lincoln Riley, if he wants to win a national title, is going to have to look in the mirror and say, hey, what do I need to do with this staff to address our deficiencies? Because make no mistake, right now with how many good teams there are in college football, USC is not a national title contender with a defense of this caliber.
The Pac-12, and it's absolutely incredible that the conference is so strong in its final season. But kind of to your point, for Southern Cal to win, they're going to have to get into a shootout each and every week. And there are so many wonderful teams in that conference. And I think about an Oregon, I think about a Washington. Those are teams that can also hang 50 on you. Those are nationally elite teams on the offensive side of the football. And their defenses don't have to be great. Their defenses don't even have to be good. They just have to be good enough. Get 1 or 2 stops and you'll get that win. Can those teams, though, turn it up a notch? Can they have that kind of defense just good enough if they make the playoff to actually win a game and perhaps even win a national title?
Well, Oregon, I think absolutely. Do you just look apples to apples, the way Oregon handled the Colorado offense versus the way USC handled the Colorado offense? Colorado couldn't get anything going against Oregon, a team that, by all accounts, is known for its offense. And quarterback Bo Nix, they've got a defensive mind as their head coach, though, in Dan Lanning, who came over from the defensive coordinator position at Georgia. And that shows with the way they defend. And Washington, though they have an offensive mind as head coach and Kalen DeBoer, think they have enough leftover players who were recruited by Jimmy Lake, their previous coach, who was a defensive mastermind, to where they can get a stop if they absolutely must. I don't know that we can say that confidently about USC. And look at the team that gave USC the most problems last season. It was Utah. Don't sleep on the Utes either. Their offense has been atrocious this season, but if they ever get Cam Rising back healthy at quarterback, they absolutely have the defense that can frustrate USC. We saw it last season. So there are other teams in that league that are just as good offensively as USC, but have either a little bit more defensive prowess, or I think in the case of Oregon and Utah, a whole lot more defensive ability.
Real quick before we pivot on to the next topic, though, I want to ask you this question. Who's the more valuable player, Caleb Williams or Cam Rising? Cam Rising hasn't even played yet.
I think it's Caleb Williams because of just without him, what is USC? This is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner who is almost being overlooked, if that's possible, this season due to the caliber of quarterbacks in that league. I mean, the Heisman Trophy race this season might as well be the Pac-12 Quarterback of the Year award. It feels like there's about 6 quarterbacks out there who are in the running for the Heisman, and whoever rises to the cream of the crop, probably due to team success, is going to win the league. Whereas you saw Utah, even without Cam Rising, win games against Power 5 opponents, Florida and Baylor, to start this season. And his return will change things in a positive way for Utah. Don't get me wrong. But if you take Caleb Williams off this USC team, I'm not sure how many Power 5 opponents they're beating.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the quarterbacks of the Pac-12 being the just such a wonderful core group. And I think and we'll move on. I think they fractured the vote to the point that a guy named Brock Bowers might actually have a shot. I'm a voter. I'm not allowed to say who I'm going to vote for because the black helicopters just start swirling, but that might give you an idea. We're joined by David Cobb of CBS Sports. Just a few more minutes, David. And we're talking about Georgia. Speaking of Brock Bowers, speaking of Georgia, he saved Georgia's bacon against Auburn. Georgia's gotten into this habit of really just laying back in the first half and then figuring things out after halftime and winning the game. It almost bit them in the rear end against Auburn. And I want to make sure that I get these numbers correct, David. I can't wait to get your input. Georgia beats Auburn by 1 score, despite the fact that Auburn had 88 yards passing. 88 yards passing. That's because they ran for 219 yards. And they did, and I wish you could see that clearly. They didn't just run for 219 yards, David. 5 yards a carry. That's not an elite rushing defense, dude. If I'm a Georgia Bulldog right now, I think I'm freaking out. How hot's the seat on 1 to 10 for a panic factor for Georgia defense right now?
Oh, I'd put it at about a 6. This Georgia defense doesn't have the elite top-end first-round talent on that defensive line like they did in 21 and 22. And you mentioned it there with the rushing yards from Auburn. A ton of credit goes to Hugh Freeze for the game plan he had in week 5 because they showed Georgia a wrinkle that they hadn't showed a whole lot of previously, which is the run-pass option plays with Peyton Thorne at quarterback, because Robbie Ashford had been their running quarterback. Peyton Thorne had been their throwing quarterback. Well, now all of a sudden they're unleashing Peyton Thorne to run the football. He breaks off some chunk plays. I think he had 3 rushes of 15 yards or more in that game. He had 1 of 30 plus yards that put Auburn in scoring position. Those are plays we're not used to seeing the Georgia defense give up. So Georgia has other problems too, but you're correct in the assertion that their front 7 is just not quite as nasty as it has been the last couple of seasons. And if they continue to start slow like this, we could see them lose a regular season game. I'm not convinced that would be overly costly to them in terms of reaching the college football playoff. But Georgia has fallen behind by double digits in its first 2 SEC games. And those games were against South Carolina and Auburn. Though neither of those teams are particularly excellent. Both of those teams are going to be scratching and clawing just to make a bowl. And seeing Georgia trail them by double digits is surprising. And some of the blame for that goes to the defensive front for not being nearly as dominant as the previous 2 versions of this team.
I think they need to get down on their knees in Athens and thank the scheduling gods that they're playing Kentucky in Athens and not Lexington this week, because what we saw out of Kentucky just absolutely beating up on Florida, something I never thought I would see in my adult lifetime, this string of dominance over the Florida Gators. They won 3 in a row for the first time since 1948-51 when they won 4 straight. Here we go. And again, I want to make sure I get the numbers correct. Ray Davis, Vanderbilt transfer, Ray Davis, the Vanderbilt pipeline, 26 carries, 280 yards, 3 touchdowns. He also caught a 9-yard pass for a touchdown. I would be worrying about that too. I can't straight cut to the chase. Will Kentucky beat Georgia in Athens this week?
I don't think that Kentucky can do to Georgia what it did to Florida. No. And I think they put their best version of themselves on tape for Georgia to scout and devour this week. I think there's an ultimatum being laid out probably to those Georgia players, team meetings this week, that, hey, you got to start defending the run or else, we're going to be in trouble. I think Georgia being 0-5 against the spread at this point in the season is about to turn it on and maybe show us a better version of themselves than what we've seen. And that Kentucky performance against Florida should be the ultimate wake-up call for them to say, hey, if we keep playing around with our food, falling behind in the first half, we're going to end up in a position where we get in a lot of trouble. And Kentucky, I still need to see more from the downfield passing game. I'm not sure how much they've really been challenged defensively, like Georgia will challenge them. So I'm leaning towards Georgia in Athens to cover what is roughly a 2-touchdown spread at the moment. I just don't see Georgia falling to 0-6 against the spread. And I'm with you. If this game were in Lexington, maybe I give the Wildcats more of a chance. But consistently over the years, Kentucky has been a 7-10 win team under Mark Stoops. And yes, that was a very impressive victory over Florida. But I'm not sure this version of Kentucky is better than the best version of Kentucky that we've seen under Stoops to this point. So I'm still pretty firmly in the Georgia camp this week, but it'll be interesting because this is by far and away, I think, the toughest test that Georgia has seen this season. So they're going to have to start faster, play better, or eventually they're going to get bit and lose one of these games against a lower to mediocre tier SEC opponent.
I'm actually going to take this opportunity to take a swipe at Dabo Swinney, because Ray Davis is exhibit number 12 of why the transfer portal can work, because you got a Ray Davis out of Vanderbilt. I think about Tyler Steen out of Vanderbilt last year, who ended up being the best lineman that Alabama had last year. Jahmyr Gibbs going from Georgia Tech to Alabama. There are players out there to be mined, and just because a guy played at Vanderbilt doesn't mean he's not worth his salt. He still has reps in the Southeastern Conference, especially across the offensive line. For the life of me, I can't understand why Dabo Swinney isn't going and say, well, let's see if there's anybody on Vanderbilt's roster we can use. Let's go check out Iowa State's roster. I get frustrated, David. I'm sorry I went off on a tangent there.
No, I'm with you. In fact, he could have used the transfer portal to bring in a kicker instead of hitting up a grad student who was sipping cocktails on the beach or what have you. Clemson, I think, there's a lot of deeper cultural issues there. The one thing I keep coming back to with Clemson this season is I think myself and a lot of people fell into this trap of thinking that hiring Garrett Riley would provide an overnight fix for the offense. I think the offense has been fine. I don't think it's been as good as maybe I'd hoped or expected. And I think some of that is due to the fact that maybe Garrett Riley and Dabo Swinney are still getting on the same page. And I would hope that over this upcoming offseason, part of getting on the same page with those two, if they're going to continue on together, is Garrett Riley going to Dabo Swinney and pinpointing positions where transfers could help. Because Dabo is kind of eschewing his whole culture here by even going outside the family to hire Garrett Riley in the first place and abandoning the hires from within that he had relied upon for so long. And now he goes outside and gets Garrett Riley. Well, Garrett Riley's going to bring some philosophies and ideas from the rest of the world of college football. And some of those have got to be, hey, let's plug our holes via the transfer portal. And if Dabo doesn't get on board with that, I'm not sure why Garrett Riley would stick around. He's a very talented young coordinator, and I would hope year two of Garrett Riley and Dabo Swinney together is more successful, more fruitful, and part of that is going to be getting transfers in there, especially I think at receiver, where it's been apparent now for a few years that Clemson is just not quite what it was at its heyday at that position.
Yeah, that's the one that really perplexes me. I don't know if it's a talent thing, David, or if it's a development thing. I mean, I look at a guy like Adam Randall, who last year, by all accounts, during spring practice last year, he had these Paul Bunyan-esque tall tales were getting out of spring practice. Then he hurts his knee, misses the first few games last year. Really still seems to be overcoming that and getting acclimated to the offense. But by all accounts, a wonderful athlete. He just hasn't progressed. And I'll put some of that because of the injury. But the rest of the receiving core, David, underwhelming, man. I don't see a receiver that can separate. I don't see a receiver that can take over a game. I don't see a receiver that can make up for deficiencies in the backfield at running back and quarterback. And that's something that Clemson has been able to lean on in years past. But it's also helped when you've had a generational talent at quarterback, a Deshaun Watson, a Trevor Lawrence, and the best running back in school history. So it makes me wonder this. Is Dabo not developing as he was at once upon a time? Or are they recruiting at a high level, but they're missing, that those guys just aren't working out, that they're overrated coming out of high school?
That's tough. I would think that as Garrett Riley can sink his teeth into this program a bit more, the development piece comes back. This is somebody with an incredible track record. SMU, TCU, we all saw what TCU did last season. A large part of that was due to the wide receivers. Quentin Johnston was arguably the best wide receiver in college football last season under Garrett Riley. I think the developmental chops are there on his part. Why we aren't seeing it manifest in a matter of months, I'm not quite sure. That's the great question for Dabo and for Clemson to answer now is where has this thing gone wrong? Because you can kind of say, hey, we're going to do it our way. We're not going to go out and get transfers. And if you continue to develop the talent, then it works. Maybe he can keep up at doing the whole thing counterculturally to the rest of college football. But if the development piece isn't there, he's going to have no choice. And then what happens to the culture? What happens to the unique way that Clemson has always recruited, right? So I think you can do both. I think you can continue to recruit the Clemson guy, right? And have your Hunter Renfrow who comes in there and goes from a nobody into a star, right? Like you can do that, but you also have to be strategic and go out and recruit from the portal. And that doesn't have to be 25 guys. You don't have to pull a Deion Sanders and flip your entire roster. We're just talking 3, 4, 5, 6 players who can come in and make a difference. I know their NIL situation is such that they can go out and get those guys. I know Clemson's an attractive brand and that talented players would be interested in transferring to Clemson. And I think the idea, too, that a transfer messes with your culture is a little misguided or misfounded because you could have a guy who goes to a group of 5 school who's the best kid in the world, academically oriented, great in the community, all of that stuff. And maybe he gets overlooked, but he goes for 1,000 yards in the Sun Belt. Well, that guy might love an opportunity to go and play at Clemson, And so the development hasn't been quite what it was. But if they get continuity with Garrett Riley, they just strategically plug holes in the portal, they can still run the ACC. There's no reason why they can't. I mean, I know Florida State's on the come up here, but I don't think that they're enough of a challenge to Clemson's dynasty to where this thing is going to flip entirely in favor of the Noles. I still think that this Clemson program has a extremely high floor with the recruiting that they've done and the continuity that they have and with the culture Dabo has. They just got to get back on the right track and get the transfers in there. Just a few of them in strategic places on the offense will do wonders. Will he go that route? The big question, but I know they're frustrated to have 2 losses at this point in the season. That's not the expectation there, and it's kind of tough to watch. It's kind of tough to see a program fall off of its trajectory like this.
I think part of it though is pride, and I'll leave you with that thought that if you're going to the portal to fill a hole to fill a position, that means you have failed developing or you failed identifying talent for that position. That means there was a shortcoming somewhere along the road. Unless there was a string of catastrophic injuries at one specific position, the onus then falls on the coach who either misevaluated the player coming out of high school or didn't do his job when the player got on the campus. David, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. You're wonderful insight as always. David Cobb of CBS Sports. Follow him on Twitter X at David W. Cobb. David, before we let you go, what are you working on? Tell us what we can expect to see on CBSSports.com.
Sure. The bottom 25 just went live at CBS Sports. That's my Tuesday project this year. It's a look at futility in college football. And there is an ACC team represented in this week's bottom 25. You can probably guess who it is. I feel awful for Virginia. What a terrible way to start the season. Anyway, if you're a glutton for punishment, go check out the bottom 25. And yeah, we got a ton of preview content for week 6 coming up. There's some great matchups this week. And I cover basketball as well, so it's getting to be that dual sport zone. So we'll have a lot on both sports in the weeks ahead. So yeah, I appreciate you giving me the chance to plug it.
At David W. Cobb on X. Dave, appreciate you coming on, brother.
No problem. Thank you.
Very professional. Look at that. That's how you get it done. Dave, you're the man, brother. I'll try not to aggravate you too much, but you were really good.
No, yeah. Anytime. Hit me up. We don't have kids yet, so I've got time on my hands. I'm happy to do it.
There's a statement in there about you're supposed to be working. Your time's supposed to be spent on making those kids, but I'm not getting in that.
Hey, with TBD, we'll see what happens there.
You need anything in the Carolinas, hit me up, bro. I got you.
Okay, thank you.
See you, man. Welcome back. Really enjoyed our time with David Cobb. Really good perspective on all matters college sports nationally. Really, really, really excellent insight on David Cobb of CBS Sports. I can work my way backward and keep preaching about Dabo Swinney, reluctance to work the transfer portal. I've gone over it ad nauseum, over. That's going to have to be what happens to transform that program back into what we saw, those versions of Clemson that we saw between 2015 until 2020. It's going to have to happen. It's the only way to really fill those gaps they have, because their gaps are significant. Their gaps are at wide receiver. Don't have that breakaway wide receiver talent, somebody who can get separation, especially when they need it the most. Against an elite defense, that hasn't been a problem at Clemson for the better part of the last decade and a half, but they're not developing receivers as they have in the past. I don't know as to whose feet the blame for that lies. Offensive line. If you go into any program, I don't care who you are. I don't care where you are. You could be in the South. You could be in the Pacific Northwest. You could be in the Midwest, wherever. And you go in to build a program and you say, I'm going to focus on the lines, offensive line, defensive line. I'm going to build a team back to front. You're going to have success. The wheels are never going to completely fall out. You can make do with everything else around you. And then maybe you hit a home run here or there at the skill positions. But as long as you have those linemen, you're going to have success. And if you're not developing those linemen, if you're not getting them, you're not bringing them in, letting them grow bigger, stronger, better, you'll learn all the techniques you need to be a Power 5 offensive lineman, defensive lineman, you're doing yourself a disservice. And that's not happening at Clemson. They're not bringing the guys in. They're maybe bringing them in, but they're not developing them. And they're not doing anything to fill the holes. Going to the portal. Even if you're getting a group of 5 guy, and he's been there for 2 years, 3 years, he's physically mature. He's played against Division I competition. He's going to be hungry to go to a Power 5 team and compete for a national championship. I see nothing but upside working the portal if you need it. And to say it's culture shocking, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, you're going to do your due diligence. You're going to vet these guys just as you do when they're coming out of high school. It's no different. What makes it, if anything, it should be easier because you've got more people to speak with. You can tell if there's been an attitude change from when this kid was a 4-star recruit in high school to where now he's a guy in the transfer portal. You have more people you can talk to. You can tell how he goes about his business. Did he go to practice every day in college? Did he go to the training table? Did he go to class? Was he a member of the community that provided services? Just so much more. And you're not going in wholesale, as David said, and wiping away just entire rosters. You don't have to do that. But if you have 5, 6, 8 gaps you need to fill or even upgrade, swallow your pride, go to the portal. The days of just saying we're going to do it the old-fashioned way, we're going to do it through high school recruiting and we're going to grow them up. Can't do it, man. You can't do that completely. It's still important. It's still the core of how you'll build a program. Make no mistake about that. But if you're trying to build an elite roster and you're trying to close talent gaps, especially when you might have missed on a couple of players or you've had an injury here or there that's really impacted one particular position, you got to hit the portal. You got to hit the portal, and Dabo's reluctance to do that is bringing that entire program down. I get it for loyalty, man. I love it. But he's loyal to a fault. At the end of the day, it's kind of like Star Trek. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Just because you're loyal to this one guy or you're loyal to these two or three guys doesn't mean you can't still do what needs to be done for the betterment of the program. Dabo increasingly reluctant to do that, but they lose a couple more games this year. I think he might get a little bit of an attitude adjustment for that. One thing David said that I will disagree with regards to Kentucky and Georgia, he said that what we saw on Saturday, Kentucky's just muscling its way over Florida at Kroger Field, Commonwealth Stadium in Lexington, was its best version of itself. I disagree. I think Devin Leary is still getting acclimated to that the offense in Kentucky, the Cohen offense. Cohen went to the NFL. He's come back to be the offensive coordinator again. I think they're still getting used to each other. And I've seen Devin Leary. I've had large examples of Devin Leary playing, and I love his game. And I still think he's getting comfortable in that offense. And if he hits his stride this week, there could be an upset because his game is enough. His game is enough to make up for anything that they might be willing to take away from Kentucky with regards to its rushing attack. If they focus on the ground game and Kentucky can't move the football like that because Georgia is focusing on that ground attack, it's Achilles' heel so far, rushing defense, that being Georgia. I think he can make them pay. I'm not calling for an upset, but I am tiptoeing in that direction with each passing day. Come Friday, I might be ready to call it. UK for the win. UK for the win. Watch them go out and lose by about 30. One more interesting tidbit before I get off. Oh, Steve Berkowitz, master of contracts at USA Today. We've got to get him on. I've had him on various different variations of my show in the past. He's got to report out about college football coaches, how much they're making, who's making this, who's making that, who's overpaid, who's underpaid, so on and so forth. Absolutely staggering numbers. And I knew the numbers were staggering, but not until I actually saw them laid out in the form of this report did it really hit home. Let's go by conference first. Right now, SEC coaches make more than $7.6 million average. Big Ten 6.7, ACC 5.1, Pac-12 4.7. For now, there's only going to be 2 left, and they're not going to be able to pay if they're not getting TV money. Then Big 12 4.6. That's a lot of cheddar cheese, man. That's a lot of cheddar cheese. Interesting to note, Mark Stoops making over $9 million a year. $9 million a year. John Calipari, he now makes more than John Calipari, by the way. John Calipari, the basketball coach at the University of Kentucky, now the second highest paid state employee in the Commonwealth. Mark Stoops is number 1. Brian Kelly, 9.9. Jimbo, 9.1. The most overpaid coach in America. You could say Mel Tucker. I guess they're still litigating all that mess. Just crazy numbers. And I think they start settling down. I really do, with NIL, the possibility of players but truly becoming employees. TV money starting to level off. I think coaching salaries are going to level off. I really, really do. What we saw a couple of years ago was insane. Started with the Jimbo contract. Michigan State, with A&M thus far, you could say has been burned with that contract. Michigan State throwing $95 million over 10 years at Mel Tucker, burned. That hasn't worked out either. There are a few other instances where the contracts are just incredibly ludicrous. And they all are tethered to these buyouts that keep them handcuffed in these situations. And yeah, well, they'll pay 14. Their boosters have the money. And there's going to come a point where people are going to stop saying that. Well, we paid that buyout. There have been so many examples of coaches getting paid not to work that it's got to end at some point. I don't see how it can continue. Ed Orgeron getting $16 million to go away. And, God bless Ed Orgeron. He was grateful to get it. And he eating burgers, hanging out on the beach, doing whatever Coach O does. But there's going to come a point where the boosters are going to say, I think we've had enough of that. Just like with NIL, they're wanting returns on their investment. I think about all the folks that dumped money into, and I'll arbitrarily use this as an example. I'm not going to beat him up. DJ Ungalele, DJU. He was everywhere last season leading up to the season. He was the starting quarterback at Clemson his second year. He's doing commercials for Dr. Pepper, doing stuff for Bojangles, this, that, and the other. They didn't get much of a return on that investment. And, of course, now he's transferred to Oregon State. And I'm sure he has opportunities at Oregon State. Nothing to the extent that he was getting as the quarterback at Clemson. No Dr. Pepper deals, no Bojangles deals. But he's getting some walking around money. And he's toiling out in anonymity, basically, at Oregon State. And that's fine. He's happy. God bless him. They're winning football games. And he's getting himself prepared for a run at going to the NFL. But there's increasingly becoming a point where these collectives, the guys who are pumping money into these collectives, they're going to want to see a little more bang for their buck. They're going to have contracts written up that will allow them to get out of these deals a little bit easier. It's going to become truly more of a business. Well, I'm not getting a return. It might even be a game-to-game thing. You threw 5 picks last week. You do 2 the week before that. I think I want to sever this deal. I don't know. I got to get my hands on some NIL agreements. But anyway, let's wrap this show up. I've got a couple of blog posts coming this week. I've got our bandwagoning segment, and then I've got the Magic 8 Ball blog post that'll be coming up also later this week. Few interviews scheduled as we move closer to week 6. Remember, keep watching on fanstreamsports.com or get the FanStream Sports mobile app. It's good on both Android and iPhone. Also visit the FanStream Sports Facebook page. Give it a follow, give it a like, leave a comment, whatever. And, of course, hit me up on Twitter, X, at ScottH4456, ScottH4456. The DMs are open. Let me know what is on your mind. Otherwise, until next time, be safe.